Good morning, Winchester. This is Erin from the Winchester Public Library. Welcome. It's our second edition of All Booked live stream. This week we are doing our live stream on Instagram instead of Facebook, which means I'm actually live today. Last week, 2 weeks ago, we had some technical difficulties, but now here we are. So welcome. I hope everyone is doing well and keeping safe. I'm going to keep watching the comments as they come. I hope people join us. The video will be available on our Facebook page and also on the Winchester Library's YouTube page as well. So today we're talking about literary adaptations, which is a text going from text to screen. So books that turn into movies, books that turn into TV shows, and not just books, it's anything in text. So that can be fiction, nonfiction, plays, comic books, graphic novels, anything really that's written in word form and turned into a movie. And I just, on my way up here, randomly took a quick pass on my bookshelf in my living room and grabbed these 6 books, which were in a row, the first 6 books on my shelf, and these 6 books alone represent 6 books that have been adapted to film and television. I think there are several that have been both. I'll just go through them quickly with you. Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, everyone's seen that, I'm sure, or heard of it. Jane Eyre, Charlotte Bronte. The Thornbirds, which was an excellent miniseries way back when, and is a great epic saga book. To Kill a Mockingbird, which I discuss a little bit in my talk. This one is an absolute must-read book and a must-see movie. And then I have Anna Karenina, which you can imagine turning this into a movie, how that would go. I'm sure some things got lost along the way. And then we have Little Women, which has is one of probably the most adapted books of all time. I learned that the first adaptation of this book came in 1917 in the way of a silent film and has been adapted so many ways in so many formats since then. Lots of television, lots of movies. It was adapted into a ballet. It was adapted into a Broadway show. So, and as you probably know, its most recent adaptation by Greta Gerwig was filmed a lot around here in the Boston area, and I have not seen it because I was planning to read the book first, but I haven't gotten there yet either. So the first 6 books on my bookshelf, literary adaptations. I'm going to throw these to the side for now. So what I thought we'd talk about today in our around 30 minutes that we have together is what are literary adaptations, which I've just explained, sort of anything that goes from text to some kind of film or video format, and some of the best known adaptations and some that are considered the best adaptations, and what authors might think sometimes about the process of their book, their words being turned into movies. And then I'll talk about some upcoming adaptations that are coming up and some that have recently come out. Like I was saying, Little Women, and Emma is another one that's been redone a lot and has a new film that has just come out. So what is the big deal about literary adaptations? Why do we love these so much? We love books, obviously. When you have a film that's derived from written material, it's very difficult to turn an author's words and vision into a film. When we are reading a book, all we have is the author's words and our imagination to sort of create a world in which that story exists. And what's beautiful about that process, and for people who love books, is that the world that you create is yours, and it's different than mine. When I read Pride and Prejudice, for example, or Wuthering Heights or Jane Eyre, the world that I create doesn't match yours at all. It couldn't, even though the story is the same, essentially. But when we go see a movie, someone else has decided what our characters look like, what our setting looks like, and those become the imprints in our mind that we see when we take a book and turn it into film. Our imagination is almost usurped just by the reality of someone else's vision, which can be fun and can turn out really well. Personally, I have two. I'm just going to go through my notes here because I don't want to miss anything. And I do want to mention these two adaptations that, for me, were almost perfect adaptations. And I have neither book with me because I've loaned them both out. Anne of Green Gables is my favorite book of all time, I think. And when I read the book, I fell completely in love with it. And in 1985, there was a CBC miniseries based on the book, starring Megan Follows as Anne of Green Gables, and Richard Farnsworth as Matthew Cuthbert, and Colleen Dewhurst as Marilla Cuthbert. The Matthew and Marilla in my mind were so phenomenally different than the Matthew and Marilla that came to the screen, but different. The actors exceeded my expectations. The whole story exceeded my expectations. It brought to life for me, for the very first time, it was the first time I had ever fallen in love with a book and then seen this book played out before my eyes. It was amazing to me. I thought it encapsulated the story, the vision, the passion of the book, the character of Anne Shirley, who's just one of the most charming literary characters in history, I think. The second adaptation that I loved is the 1995 BBC miniseries of Pride and Prejudice, starring Jennifer Ely as Mary Bennet and Colin Firth as Mr. Darcy. That was a great one. It's a several part miniseries, so it's not a 2 hour, it's not trying to get through Pride and Prejudice in 2 hours, which is be tricky, and you leave a lot of the comedy parts of the movie out, the book out, and the nuance. This miniseries was fantastic, and if you have a chance to watch it, it's really worthwhile, and it's fun to, if you haven't read Pride and Prejudice in a while, it's fun to read the book and then go back to watch that miniseries. If you saw Bridget Jones's Diary, of course, you saw Colin Firth play another Mr. Darcy. And Bridget Jones's Diary, speaking of adaptations, is a loosely based adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Helen Fielding took some of the themes and storylines of that and turned it into sort of a modern day Pride and Prejudice, which is really also fun. And of course, Mr. Darcy. And there are a couple things to think about when we think about adaptations. A novel is often not just dialogue. There's a lot of narration in a novel. And trying to turn that kind of narration into film is difficult because you're at a movie, you want it to tell a story, you generally don't have a lot of time for it to tell a story, so you want it to go kind of quickly. If you looked at a book and took out a lot of the inner narration of the protagonist or narrator, and just cut just to the dialogue, you'd be cutting out a lot of that book. And a lot of the descriptive narration is extremely important to the storytelling, and that's what's done in film through scenes and setting and music. But we can't just rely on the dialogue of a book. And a good example of this is a book that I just read for you guys this weekend, which I have here somewhere. It was Brokeback Mountain. Brokeback Mountain is a great movie. It's an award-winning movie. It's a tragic movie. And it's based on it feels like a hugely epic film. You know, it feels like it's vast, it's deep, and it's based on a short story, which I don't know if anybody knew. It's based on a short story. It stays fairly true to the book, but it's brief. It's deep, but it's brief. And the director, Ang Lee, brought this movie to life, really, just not with a lot of dialogue, because there wasn't a lot to work with, and he didn't really create a story where no story existed. But he was able to use imagery to capture a lot of what is told in the book. And he did it really well. This is often not done well at all. And that is why a lot of adaptations kind of fall flat. People don't take the time to really get the soul of the story. They chop that part out, and they just try to keep some of the dialogue and major plot points, and then you can see like the skeleton or the scaffolding of a story, but there's no arc for characters, or there's no depth to the story, and there's no, big transitions for characters to undertake, because there's just not enough time. Another thing to think about when books are adapted is just the sheer length of time that you have. Like I was saying about the Anna Karenina, trying to turn, or any of these books, trying to turn Rebecca, which is coming, into a movie is difficult. Something has to go. And so I've created a list for you of adaptations that have been done well, and they've been done well for a variety of reasons. Some because the author of the book has been involved in the process and tried to help keep the essence of the story alive. And I have two great examples of that here, which I'll show you in a moment. And the other reason is that they just haven't chopped out the most important things in the book. Some adaptations are not great. Some adaptations we love. For example, this is an adaptation that's a very popular movie. Everyone who's seen it is, takes something away from it. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey. The book was written by Ken Kesey. Ken Kesey absolutely hates this film and claimed to have not even seen the film, simply because the story in the book is told from the perspective of Chief Berman, who's the Native American patient in the mental institution, and this movie does not tell the story from his perspective. And for him, that was just, it was ludicrous to think that the story is even the same, told from a different perspective. But I think in order to fit the book in to film format and make it watchable, something probably had to change, because to have a man who is locked in and having, sort of like almost fever dreams is difficult. It's really difficult to watch a movie like that. I mean, it could be done, but I don't know. It's not a movie I would probably want to sit through. Two adaptations that are really excellent, based on books that were great, actually, is one is Perks of a Wallflower. Stephen Chbosky wrote this book, Chbosky, and it's a fairly deep and sad young adult novel that covers serious themes like sex and drugs and abuse and friendship and mental health struggles, depression, anxiety. And it's a great book. There's a lot of emotion in this book. And in order to do a book like this justice, it really has to be, you really have to catch all of that in your film. And so Stephen Chbosky worked really hard to get this to film level, and he wrote the screenplay and also directed the film. And he himself made some changes to what would be included in the story for the sake of time and flow of the film. But if you haven't read this book, I recommend it. And then watch the film, because it's really good too. And it's a great example of how book to film adaptations happen well. The other movie I wanted to bring up was Room, which was an Emma Donoghue book. She's a Canadian, Irish author. And Room is a story about a boy and his mother who are trapped against their will in a room. And the book is written from the perspective of the 5-year-old boy named Jack. And all he has known in his life is this room. And it is his safe place because it is his home, even though terrible things happen there. He eventually is able to leave the room, but the room is such a deep part of him that it's where he wants to be. Because the book was written from the perspective of a 5-year-old boy, that's kind of difficult to translate into a film. Because how do you even tell that story? The director, so again, Emma Donoghue wrote the screenplay for this movie. So her vision of her book is really intertwined with how the movie turned out, because she was able to have control of her story. So in telling the story from a child's perspective in a movie, they did things like keep the camera very low to the ground, almost as though a child was looking at from his height up. Lots of dark corners and floor angles. It's another great example of a good adaptation. Let's see what else we have. So I'm going to go through some movies that maybe you didn't know were books. So there's this one, The Princess Bride, which I would also hope everyone has at least seen. It's a perfect movie, in my opinion. It's just perfect. It's perfect for everyone. And it's a book. And I think a lot of people who see the movie now probably didn't know it's a book, and I think it's because the movie is just so great. It can stand alone, and you don't feel like you need to have read the book to have the movie make sense. The book gets into a little bit more of the background of the characters, and is a great complement to the movie. But if you had to just choose one to do, the movie is so adorable that I would choose the movie. Another movie, and this is a nonfiction, which is outside of the realm of what I was going to talk about today, but I wanted to bring this one up. It's called The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean. And what makes this an interesting adaptation is that it was turned into a movie. It was adapted into a movie, and the movie was called Adaptation because it was all about, the movie adaptation was all about adapting this book to the movie, and what the author went through, and what Charlie Kaufman, the director or the writer of the fictional writer of the screenplay went through. Well, he's not fictional, he's a real guy, but he was the guy who wrote the screenplay. You have to see it for it to make sense, because it's kind of like a book within a book, or a movie within a book. Good. Some other popular adaptations, I'll just go through a list. When you look up the best adaptations of books, there are a few that always come up on every list. First of all, there's a whole slew of Stephen King adaptations that many of you have probably seen over time. Stephen King has written 100 books, I don't even know. I've read many of them. I have loved many of them. I've seen a lot of adaptations, and he feels strongly about some of his adaptations. He thinks everyone should have a chance to have their book adapted to a movie, and that there can be a different vision. He's very pro adaptation, even though he hasn't necessarily loved all of his adapted novels. Two that he does love, he has a top 10 list, but two that he loves that I love. The first is a book called The Body. It was a novella, and The Body became Stand By Me, which is a book about sort of a loss of innocence, coming of age of a group of boys who seek out a dead body, and along the way encounter some bullies, some abuse. It's told in retrospect by one of the kids who's looking back over his life. It's a fantastic movie, and it's interesting just that it's based on a novella. Another book of Stephen King's, and I'm not sure if it's considered a novella or a short story, but it's called Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption, and that's what the Shawshank Redemption movie was based on, which is a fantastic movie. The Green Mile is another one that's a great movie, and those are a little bit like not the Stephen King you might think of when you think of It and Carrie and Cujo and Pet Sematary and the more horror style of Stephen King. A really great, in my opinion, and also Stephen King's opinion, adaptation was his book Misery, which is a really great book. Terrifying and brought to life beautifully the character by Kathy Bates, and James Caan is in the movie. It's frightening and also funny and kind of twisted. So reading, if you're new to adaptations and you want to, and you're open to, some horror, I would recommend that one. To Kill a Mockingbird is one that I mentioned, and I think that this book is, I have it somewhere. I think this is a book that is relevant always. I hope it's required reading. I did not grow up in this country, and I don't believe it was where I grew up in Canada, but it 100% should be, and I'm assuming that it is here. And the movie is so well done, and it brings the characters to life. Harper Lee does a great job at bringing her characters to life, but the movie is, it elevates the book, which doesn't always happen, especially in a book that is handling such a difficult subject matter. The Godfather is a book or series of books that's also always on every best adapted list. I don't know if that counts for all the Godfathers or if it's just the first Godfather. I have not read The Godfather. I've seen the film, and I liked it. It was okay for me. Fight Club is another one that always makes the list, and it's interesting because a lot of people believe that Fight Club, the movie, is actually better than the book, and I think it's the adaptation is slightly different from the Chuck Palahniuk book, but he's a big fan of the film, and I think that's the kind of, it's such a viscerally effective movie because of the sheer violence of it, and also of the storyline, which I won't give away. But it's really alarming to watch the movie, and I think that idea doesn't jump off the page when you see something that's just so raw. It's harder to have that kind of thing jump off the page. Some books, you close the book, it's a movie, you never need to see the movie. The book is great. You don't think anything can be enhanced by a film. I think that The Fight Club is probably one of those where it's worthwhile watching the movie if you've read the book. Heart of Darkness is a book that I really tried to read for you guys this weekend because it's supposed to be one of the books you should read. It is called Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. It's basically like, it's like this guy is in the Congo and he's having a fever dream, and it's his stream of consciousness, basically, or unconsciousness. It's deep and difficult to get into, but it is a very famous adaptation. This Apocalypse Now is a famous adaptation of this book, Heart of Darkness. This movie is long and slow. Also, they're probably perfectly matched. They've changed the setting. They've changed some of the details, but the themes run deep in this book. Considered by many Conrad's finest, most enigmatic story. I tried. Maybe I'll keep trying. I have it for another couple of weeks anyway. The Jane Austens have to be mentioned if we're talking about adaptation. So we have many versions of many books. Sense and Sensibility has had a couple of popular adaptations. Emma has had 3 big adaptations, one of which just came out this year, which I have not seen yet. I'd like to see. The movie Clueless, some of you might not know this, is a loose adaptation of the movie Emma, of the book Emma. The Pride and Prejudice we talked about, and Mansfield Park has a great film adaptation too. Some other adaptations, Agatha Christie gets adapted a lot into film and TV and miniseries. Hercule Poirot is a very likable character who gets interpreted in a lot of different ways, and if you're a fan of the books, it's fun to watch all the different adaptations of that character, just because he's, it's neat to see how he's played by other people. Kenneth Branagh has been doing him for a couple of movies now. He did Murder on the Orient Express a couple of years ago, and Death of the Nile is coming out later this year. Game of Thrones, Harry Potter, big adaptations that everyone knows were books, everyone knows are films, TV shows, and now I have some TV adaptations because we're running out of time. I don't know how the time goes so fast. Some TV adaptations that you might have seen lately. Big Little Lies was fantastic. That was based on a book by Leanne Moriarty, but this is a case in which which is similar to that happened with Game of Thrones, where the show continues beyond what book was written. So I think the show was such a hit that they decided to keep it, and it's a great example of a book really coming to life on screen because of the slick photography. They changed the setting, but it's just very beautiful coastal California, and it's fun to watch, and it's a little over the top, which is fun. Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng is newly out. It was a good book. I have not seen the show. I understand it's good and maybe even better than the book, so I'll check that one out. The Wally Lamb book, I Know This Much Is True, has been adapted for TV also, and that is a beautiful book, great book. So I'm interested to see that one. And Defending Jacob, which is written by a local author, William Landay. He adapted this book was adapted also for TV, so it's a series starring Captain America, also from Boston. It's filmed around Boston. It's filmed around Newton area. Coming out this year, I'm just going to go down the list because now we're really running out of time. The Witches by Roald Dahl is coming out, starring Anne Hathaway and Octavia Spencer, and I think that's going to be a fantastic book. If you haven't read that with your kids, you might want to, or fantastic movie. If you haven't read the book with your kids, you might want to do that so you can watch that one together. Rebecca, which I was talking about earlier, the Daphne du Maurier book, which I have not read. I'm going to keep this one and read it. I'm going to return everything else so you guys can take it out of the library. Hillbilly Elegy, which is nonfiction, is being adapted. I think that one's being adapted for Netflix. I'm not 100% sure. Umbrella Academy, which is a graphic novel, is being adapted. Cursed, which is a fantasy book, I think it's YA, is being adapted. And Julia Quinn's 8-book Bridgerton series, which I have not read, but I would like to read, is being adapted by Shonda Rhimes for Netflix. And she has a bit of a golden touch with anything, movies, TV. So I think that one's going to be something to watch. I will give you guys some show notes with some links to what we talked about this week. And I hope it didn't go too fast. I feel like I didn't cover half the things I wanted to cover. I hope that you have some ideas about some books you might want to pair up with a movie. This is another one I didn't mention, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the John le Carré book, which has been adapted a few times. I wanted to show you it's been adapted into a film. It was a miniseries, BBC. This kind of thing can be really fun to read the book, watch both adaptations, and just compare them and see what you liked, what you didn't, what you thought they might have lacked or enhanced from the book. This week, check out our website at winpubliv.org. We've got a lot of online programming going on this week, and see what we've got lined up. And I wanted to mention that you can now, you can reserve books online and pick them up curbside. Very safe, so check that out. And this afternoon, starting at noon, we have a summer caravan that's going to be departing from the library cars filled with librarians to promote our summer reading. They have a route planned out through town. You can find the route on our website, winpublib.org. So check that out, and if you can find a place to stand along the route with your kids, wave at the children's librarians, adult librarians as they go by, library staff. They'd be so happy to see you. We're missing a lot of faces, so it would be fun to see you on the side of the road, have them honk. I think the cars are going to be decorated. You might see some, not going to say, maybe a unicorn or two. Definitely going to be a Cheshire cat, so you might want to check that out. And next Monday, I'll see you here at 10 on the All Book live stream. It'll be on Instagram Live. We'll get this video up for you on Facebook soon. And next week, we're going to talk about backlisted books. I'd love to hear any topics that you are interested in hearing about. Leave me some comments. Leave me some of your favorite adaptations. And I look forward to seeing you next week.